Joining us now to discuss is Block's head of decentralized identity, Daniel Buchner. Daniel, how's it going?
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. So you lead Block's decentralized identity efforts. You did it at Microsoft. This is something that is a very interesting topic to me, and surely for Brad too, and probably a lot of people in the audience. But when people talk about DID, decentralized identity, do people really know what it is? Could you give the very quick elevator speech pitch on what it actually is?
Yeah. So, traditional identity previous to this had been email, username, password. Those things are all essentially leased to you by other companies. So, your email typically isn't yours. If that company was to go away, so too would your ability to access accounts. Username, Twitter, it could be banned.
Yeah.
We're seeing this happen a lot. And so what decentralized identity really gives you is identity that's truly yours for the first time, right? Just like you own your Bitcoin keys, for instance, you should own your IDs as well, because your digital person is only going to become more and more important in the years to come, not any less. I think most of our life, in many ways, remotely will shift online into digital means, and you have to have strong digital identity to really do that well.
So, privacy is a very difficult thing, especially in today's world where our regular identity, you mentioned a Twitter account being banned, a Twitter username being banned. Right now, all of our life is online. The maps and arrows can point back to people, but is that something that can be solved by DID, or is it still an issue with DID where privacy is still difficult to maintain?
Yeah, so privacy is interesting, right? When we talk about DIDs, I think one thing to know is what we're not talking about is one ID for a person that they use for everything, because that would obviously be very, it'd harm your privacy, you'd be tracked everywhere. So we believe in DIDs being sort of either per relationship or for certain activities. So you might have a DID for your social persona, you might have another for your personal, and maybe one for work. People do this today, they just don't realize it. They kind of carve out their LinkedIn profile, probably wouldn't post exactly the same things there that you might on social media. And so you can see them doing it, they just don't really have the tools to control it. And I think that's a lot of our job as technologists to make that happen.
That's really clever. Do you have anything?
I'm curious if you could give us a use case that maybe is closer to market than further away.
Yeah, so one thing we're working hard on is some of this Web 5 work you saw us launch. Really, the announcement of that we're going to get started last year here. It's coming along. We have the libraries that are nearly ready for developers to be able to build any sort of decentralized app they want. One use case we're really focused on is TBDEX, which is a trust spanning protocol that allows you to really exchange any type of value asset, whether it's fiat, decentralized currency, or otherwise. And that one is something that we're trying to have demos out by the end of the year so people can see what a truly decentralized value exchange looks like across many different types of asset classes.
And so where's the decentralized identity
part of that?
Into that?
Yeah, so from regulated institutions perspective, obviously KYC is a big one. I don't particularly love it, but it's something that we have to do. So things like privacy-preserving verifiable credentials that someone can exchange proof that they're maybe an accredited investor or they've been KYC'd. And then there's other things, right? Like even if you look forward 20 years and we had a hyper-Bitcoinized world where people are paying for everything in cryptocurrency, you still have trust, right? We're not walking around doing dead drops in the middle of the night to buy things. We might want to know that the person we're buying a car from actually owns the title. And I think that becomes a verifiable credential in the future. So a protocol that allows you to exchange things based on privacy-preserving trust and digital identity is the future, and I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah. What do you think the roadblocks are to mainstream adoption to DIDs? Because we've talked about privacy a little bit. We've had things like PGP for, since the 90s, and people don't really use it. People kind of use it. It's kind of a little clunky, maybe, if you don't know what you're doing. So what are the blockers? How do you get DIDs to not have the same fate as PGP?
Yeah, so I think we have to take a different perspective in terms of UX. It's the largest hurdle. Lose your keys, you lose everything. There are some advancements in those fields that are happening right now. We're looking at how we're implementing those things as well. I think that's number one, is getting that experience right. Number two is just getting it into mainstream culture, getting people to use it and get value out of it. So one example is just in April, LinkedIn and Microsoft teamed up to start accepting verifiable credentials that prove your work history and educational history on LinkedIn. Because in an age of AI where I think civil and fraudulent accounts is only going to increase. I think they looked ahead of the curve, and this is a little bit of work I did there. And that's like a really good example of putting something in front of people for mainstream purposes that they'll get value out of. People can say, yeah, as a recruiter, I want to see legitimate entities on LinkedIn. Right? That's a valuable thing to a business. So the more things we can build into mainstream culture, not just cryptocurrency, right? That's still a relative niche compared to big tech. The farther we'll go.
Right. Got anything?
How does that work? That's so interesting about the verifiable credentials in LinkedIn. Like, you were involved in that, I think, right?
Yeah, the early stages of that. I left before it was completed.
How does it work?
Yeah, so essentially, if you think about what a credential is, it's essentially a signed proof from someone, right? It could be anyone that signs a proof. And you have to trust it. It's if you trust them, it means something to you. So, for instance, an employer, a lot of these institutions that are obviously are trusted, are the center of saying who was or was not an employee. So they essentially take the work history record, anonymize some of it, make some of it privacy preserving, and sign it with their DID. So a company has a DID, signs it. Now that's a recorded proof that you can provide to someone else, in this case LinkedIn, who can independently verify that yes, Microsoft says you previously worked at Microsoft. And so it's a signature scheme, but it's not too much crazier than signing a Bitcoin transaction, just a little more formalized, and it's an international standard.
Right, that's interesting. You're wearing the TBD shirt, so I want to invoke Web 5 again. And I'm going to read from Jack Dorsey. Jack Dorsey previously said Web 5 could probably be his, quote, most important contribution to the internet, right? A lot of people here like talking about Web 3. You and I probably like talking about Web 5. How does the evolution of Web 3 or Web 5 factor into people controlling more of their personal information?
Yeah, and I'll address the name right off the bat, right? People, why'd you call it Web 5? Well, the biggest reason is I used to work at Mozilla back in the day. I, kind of fought in the browser wars, and was there when HTML5 was first beginning. And what we see this as is, much like HTML5 brought some really necessary technologies to the browser, like data that can be stored locally, geolocation, great stuff like that. We're doing the same to bring more control of people's identity and personal data from their apps, and actually integrate that deeply in the browser. So this effort is to uplift the web, not really even about digital currency. That's a small part of it, right. Just to give it capabilities for people to own control their data. So a big piece for us is like, what's the least amount of blockchain and the least amount of these technologies we can employ, because you don't really need it for a lot. Right. We want to see apps in the future that exclusively store their data with people's personal data stores and don't have to go through a middleman. Like I love some of these apps out there, but I'd like it a lot more if my data just kind of was under my control the whole time.
Right, I think it makes a lot of sense, and unfortunately that's all the time we have for you today, so thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
That was Daniel Buchner from Block.